Welcome back to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone. I'm Bryce Kyle, one of the said Pentecostals. We're so glad you can join us today. We have a couple very special episodes lined out for you guys. One you're getting ready to listen to in just a few moments, and the other will be next week. Thank you so much for listening today. Today, I'll be interviewing my co-host, the great Jaredith Mize. Next week, the roles will be reversed as Jaredith will interview me. I'm looking forward to getting to know Jaredith a little more. I hope all of you are as well. We get into a broad range of subjects, from our walks with God to ministry to our mutual love of all that is music, to our favorite books, and much, much more. So without further ado, let's get on with the interview. Tell us a little about yourself and how we got to this point. Just a brief little introduction of Jaredith Mize.
Okay, so I was born... Okay, do we want to go that far back?
As far as back as you like.
Okay, so I was born... basically in the country. I was raised kind of first several years in the country. Spent a lot of time with my grandparents on their farm. This is my mom's side of the family, and they are all very devout Methodists. So in the first few years of my life, I attended a Methodist church with my mom and my grandparents, and my dad was, I guess you call him Pentecostal, in the sense that he sat in a recliner and watched Jimmy Swaggart on TV.
Right.
So he never missed a Sunday.
Yeah.
But he didn't go to church.
The convenience of televangelism.
Right.
Yeah.
It's convenient, I guess. Yeah. You don't have to move out of your easy chair. So.
Right.
So that was kind of where I started. Now, my dad did come from a Pentecostal family. So at some point, I'm not sure exactly why, my parents decided to start going to an apostolic church again. My mom never had been, I guess, but my dad decided to start going. I was probably, I want to say 4 years old, maybe, if I'm remembering this correctly, but I have very few memories, and I'm not sure if my memories of the Methodist church are later when I just visited, but I can vaguely remember some things. But when we started going to an apostolic church, and it was, I believe if I remember correctly, I was 5 when I was baptized and 6 when I got the Holy Ghost. So I was very young.
Right.
And I've spent most of my life then in the church. My dad's family, like I said, was Pentecostal, so he had a background in this.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I guess I was just really sensitive as a kid, and I responded easily, I guess. I don't know, I was very, very sensitive, very sincere, and I got the Holy Ghost really early.
Sure.
And I felt the call into ministry pretty early, and we can talk about that maybe later, but anyway, that's kind of where I started. Now, I am 33 years old. I'm married to my wife, Ann. We have a son. He's 9 years old. His name's Aiden. And I'm a minister. I have a local license with the UPC and a minister at my local church. I'm involved in, obviously, this podcast,
numerous other
things, ministry stuff. I do a lot of teaching. One thing that I guess I should mention is I do have a secular job. I worked for my church for a while, which was great, but I work for a uniform company. I'm sales director for them, and really just pretty busy. It's hard sometimes to even find, how it is, Bryce. But
right.
It's hard to find time even to record these episodes sometimes, let alone you do the editing, and it's a lot.
A lot to put on our plates.
It is, but we really do enjoy it. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I love it.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
As do I.
So anyway, that's kind of where I started and then where I am. But I guess we can fill in the middle.
how important is the Pentecostal heritage to someone? Because I don't have a Pentecostal heritage.
Right.
And so I don't know how. I mean, I see people talk about it all the time, heritage, and I'm a fourth generation Pentecostal, and it's just, that's important to a lot of people. How much is it important to you?
The heritage. Okay, so I did grow. I am, let's see, several generations here. Let's see. My great-great-grandfather attended an apostolic church. My great-grandfather was a pastor, and he was licensed with the PAW. My grandpa was in the apostolic church most of his life, or a good portion of his life. And my dad was actually a licensed minister and a home missions pastor with ALJC. And now here I am. I guess that would make me fifth generation apostolic, and I'm licensed with the UPCI. So yeah, there is this long heritage in the apostolic movement, and it is important to me in a way. And then on the flip side of that same coin, it's not. Mm-hmm. And I'll explain what I mean by that. I am really grateful for that heritage. I'm grateful for this experience that I have. I'm grateful that it was easy for me, I guess, to get into this movement because I was born into it, basically born into
right.
it. Not technically, I guess, but basically as a small child, I was here because of this heritage of my dad and my grandparents and great-great-grandparents even.
Sure.
So I'm thankful for that. I'm glad that my son's going to have that. On the other hand, a lot of what I do and feel and it's not really about that. It's about my relationship with God, and it's about things that I'm doing in the present.
Yeah, I think that's what I was really trying to bring out, was because I think we get too hung up on the past so much, and we're not really moving forward.
I agree.
Yeah. I
feel like that a lot of people do focus on this heritage, and they talk maybe too much about the heritage of the Pentecostal heritage. And yeah, they talk about the old landmarks and all these things that are all well and good, but in reality, that didn't really do much for me.
Right.
It came down to me actually getting a relationship with God. Actually, and we'll talk a little bit more about that journey probably as the episode goes on, but it came down to me and God. Mm-hmm. And if it hadn't been for that, then all the heritage in the world, I could be a 1,000th generation and it wouldn't make any difference because that heritage doesn't save you.
Right.
That heritage doesn't prepare you for ministry. That heritage doesn't really do much for you.
Right.
So if you do get stuck in the past, you're stuck.
Yeah. I think it's Apostolic Archives.
Yes.
I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Okay. They have a museum.
Yes, they do.
All right. I just found it was funny to me because they have ministers' clothes on display. Like
that's interesting.
Yeah, because he's been posting pictures of it.
I didn't realize that. I followed him a little bit, but
so this is brother so and so's shoes that he wore. This so and so tent revival or whatever. I
guess it's interesting, kind of, but it's
yeah. I mean, I like history as much as anyone else, but like at some point, it's a little vain.
Right. Yeah, I get that. I was in a Catholic hospital in Iowa. I'm trying to think where it was exactly. I was in Rock Island, Illinois. That's where I was. It's Quad Cities, Iowa, Illinois. I was in this hospital, and they have some relics from saints.
Yeah.
And they have a little piece of Saint Francis of Assisi. Not his clothes, but an actual piece of Saint Francis.
Wow.
I'm not sure if it's like tooth or bone, or it's tiny, but it's in a case. And I think we should stop. We definitely should stop short of that.
Yeah.
but there is almost this preacher worship sometimes. It seems like in our movement, and especially these guys who are really influential and it's good to honor them, and I guess the history is interesting. But you gotta be careful not to live so much in the past that you don't move forward and you don't do things in the present.
Right. Besides an obvious calling to ministry and obviously calling from God, what really made you pursue a license? to be licensed minister?
Okay, so it started, I feel like, when I was really young. I was probably, it was just before we moved from Vincennes, Indiana, to Columbus, Indiana, with my mom's job, and moved from where my mom's family was from up here to Columbus and Seymour area, where my dad's family was from.
Yeah.
And it would have been right before that I first felt a call, and that was I probably would have been 8 years old, maybe. I was young. And I felt some kind of call, and specifically, I didn't really know at the time. I don't think I knew anything at the time. I think it was because maybe it had to do with the idea of the adventure of foreign missions, or just the idea of being, I guess, the self-sacrifice, the romanticism of it or whatever. And then again, maybe it was more direct than that. Maybe God was specifically calling me to that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to feel about it this far out, but that's kind of what I felt at the time. But I definitely felt God pulling me and calling me to do something. And then it was several years really before I pursued anything. I got lost a little bit during my teenage years and my early 20s. And finally came back around, and I feel like really getting serious about living for God coincided with, there were two events in my life that changed my course. One was getting married to some degree. I got married at 19, and my wife was extremely focused on, finding the right mate that God wanted for her.
Yeah.
And making sure it was in the will of God and that I was not going to lead her astray. I was really focused on getting married because I was in love and I wanted to get married, and I didn't really think too much about it, and I was just carnal enough that I didn't even pray about it. And luckily she was praying for the both of us. And at one point, actually, she broke up with me for, I think, a month. It was more, she says it wasn't breaking up. She says it was like taking a break.
Like a time of reflection.
Yeah, she reflected, she prayed, she fasted.
Yeah.
I cried, I didn't eat, loathed myself. It was self-loathing. And actually, I remember vividly one thing in particular. I lost like 50 pounds or something. I didn't eat. And my mom, one of my favorite things was deer chili. My mom made deer chili and brought it to my room because I didn't leave my room. I don't know if I even showered during that month, but she brought me deer chili and I wouldn't eat it. And she knew something was really wrong. So anyway, I was heartbroken. Long story short, we got back together. She thought that she got her answer and that everything was going to be okay regardless of my faults. So we ended up getting married at 19. Now, that changed course for me slightly. I feel like I was still pretty far off track in some ways. I was still probably from the age of 13 or 14, maybe 14 to maybe 13 to 24, 25. I was basically going to church. I wasn't really in church, as you might. I was at church.
Right.
And I went because my parents expected me to. Everybody expected me to. I think I talked about this in a recent episode, but it was just the thing that I needed to do. And then being that close to it, I finally was easily able to come back. So I'm glad I stayed in proximity of the church, but really I wasn't that much in. Now, when I got married, I did start to focus more on this idea of, hey, you're an adult now. You have to, and I still made a lot of mistakes. Oh man, I got to grow up.
Yeah.
And I didn't right away for a few years, actually.
Yeah.
And I made a lot of mistakes. Luckily, none of those were drastic enough to, cause my marriage to fall apart. Although God was looking out for me because I was stupid. Mm-hmm. I just did some stupid things. And I wasn't really focused. And then, but I think I did understand the seriousness of it. And I was like, I was in that place where I'm going to get it together. I'm going to get really serious about this eventually, soon, tomorrow, someday.
Right.
Finally, I think the moment really when it changed for me, when Anne, and this would have been a Sunday morning in 2007, Anne came into our room. I think I was still asleep, if I remember correctly. And she had a pregnancy test in her hand. And she broke the news to me that we were going to have a baby.
Yeah.
And I was not ready for that.
That's a big eye opener.
It is. It was, and we talked about this just because we knew we were doing this episode, and I talked to Ann about it, and I think the reason that I curled up in the fetal position and cried for the next couple hours, I'm not making this up. I really did this.
Wow.
I think it was because I was mourning the death of my youth. I knew things were going to get real quick.
Yeah. That happened to me when I turned 30.
Oh, yeah. You feel it.
Yeah.
There's moments. I felt that one, too.
Yeah.
I think it was actually 29 for me. For some reason, it was a weird thing. But I guess I realized next year's 30 and it hit me early. But
right.
There's those moments in life. And that was one of them for me. It was like, I'm responsible for making sure that this little human doesn't totally mess up his life. Right. You know, there's a lot of responsibility here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I turned it around. Then I got really serious about it, and then working for my church, that probably working in close proximity with Brother Arrowwood, working at that point, being really close to ministry. I worked for a couple of years in the office at the church. I was basically like a assistant to the pastor, not an assistant pastor, but just an assistant. I did a lot of different things. I did a lot of things. And I, cleared jams in the printer. I changed light bulbs. I typed a lot of things, and right. I did the weekly bulletins. I mean, just all these little tasks, that add up. And we had a school, still do a school and a daycare and church was all in the same building at that point. And I did a little bit of everything. So, but just being that close to ministry and on a daily basis, being that close to Pastor Arrowwood really kind of, I guess, reignited that. And I was more serious about my walk with God then. And God started pulling on my heart again, saying, I want you to do something. And I didn't know what it was at that point. I thought, well, maybe it's this thing I thought it was before. Maybe it's something different, but I need to do something. So I started reading, the required reading. I started reading through the Bible again, all the way through. And I eventually went before the board to get my license. And it was intimidating. I think it's designed to be intimidating, but it was intimidating. But I'm so glad I did it. And I started actually, I think probably before that, even before I worked at the church, I had been getting into teaching, teaching Sunday school classes and stuff. And now I coordinate our adult Bible hour at 3:00 on Sundays. We have classes for adults. I kind of, coordinate that. I do a lot of teaching. I teach at the detention center for teenagers who are locked up with a lot of issues usually. And we have a class we do there, a drug and alcohol class. We have church services. So, I'm involved in some of that stuff. But I think a lot of it goes back to waking up, realizing I had to raise a child and be a dad. And I wanted to be a good example. And then being there working in the church and seeing ministry in action all the time, every day. And that kind of pushed me toward it. So long answer to a simple question, but there you go.
That's fine. If you feel comfortable with this, would you mind sharing some more details on your fall from grace, so to speak, your wilderness period, or however you like to call it?
Yeah, I might not mention names here, but
just whatever you're comfortable with, it's fine.
No, I do want to talk about it. Now, starting out, it was just me being rebellious. I was rebellious. I was probably from the time I was 11 or 12. I started. I don't think it's uncommon.
Yeah.
But I started becoming more rebellious, and me and my dad would argue a lot, and we didn't see eye to eye on anything. I think, and it just got to the point where at probably 15 or 16, we were just arguing all the time, and I felt like I was the alpha male, so to speak, and you can only have one alpha in the pack, so I was challenging his authority. I guess I was rebellious, and he was very my way or the highway, kind of. It's kind of this is how it was. It was my house, my rules.
Right.
And
as most fathers are.
I kind of see myself doing that now, and I'm like, don't do that. But yeah, it comes with the territory.
Yeah.
So, needless to say, it was volatile at home a little bit, and we got into it, on several occasions. Finally, it got to the point where I said, I spent a couple nights in my car actually, just because I was so angry. I'm like, I'm not coming home. I slept in the JC parking lot, I think, and that was just me being rebellious and being stubborn,
right,
in a lot of ways. But finally, at 17, it came to a head, and we just couldn't live in the same house anymore. And I left, and I think I was 17. I was already graduated from high school, so I was either 17 or maybe I had just turned 18. Anyway, I moved, got an apartment, and long story short, I ended up getting injured on the job. And I was on a weight restriction. I couldn't lift hardly anything for a while, and I was a temp at the time. So, guess what happens? You're out.
You're on.
Yeah. Tough luck. Sorry about it, but
yeah.
I had to eat crow and move back home. And I swallowed my pride. I went home, and it was leaving for that little bit. I think was one of the best things I ever did. Mm-hmm. And I. Made up with my parents. By the time I got married at 19, we had a pretty good relationship, and it's just gotten better. Yeah. So I think that distance wasn't a bad thing. It was probably good that I did move out when I did. But I was definitely still rebellious at that point. I had learned how to work through some issues with my parents, but I just was rebellious. I was living kind of doing my own thing, doing whatever I felt was right. You know how it goes. I wasn't doing anything like crazy out there. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't, doing all that kind of stuff. But I just didn't really care about church, and my relationship with God was just pretty much non-existent at that point.
Yeah.
Because I was just selfish.
Sure.
So it wasn't so much about the things I was doing as it was I was just focused inward, and I wasn't doing the things I should be.
Why the UPCI? Why not another organization, or maybe even more independent?
That's a good question, especially considering that my great grandpa was PAW, my dad was ALJC.
Exactly.
But most of my life I went to UPC churches. When I went to get my license, I went to a UPC church. So that's part of it. Also, I did like a lot of what they had going on. I've been to a lot of. I actually never stayed at UPC camp, but I've been to a lot of camp meetings, the services. We always went to the conferences. I guess I was just my comfort zone. I have friends in ALJC, and a couple friends in PAW, but it's more like some friends in WPF. But it was more like it was my comfort zone. I felt like I agreed with most of what they taught and had going on, so I just think overall it was the best fit. Not that it was better objectively speaking, but for me it was better. So I don't want to necessarily try to preach the gospel of the UPCI or anything, but it's like for me it was the choice, kind of the obvious choice. And in every organization, there's things that, it's a big group of people. So there's flaws and all that stuff, and there's always going to be. But, I'm happy with the choice. I have my local license. I probably will eventually, hopefully soon, go back for a general license. Mm-hmm. But, that's that.
Okay. The only reason why I ask is because you and I have talked before in the past where there were some things that you just felt uncomfortable aligning yourself with.
There were.
Yeah.
When I actually, I think when I worked at the church, I think I actually went to Pastor Airwood's office.
Right.
When I was reading the manual, which is one of the things you're supposed to do. And I went to Pastor Airwood and I'm like, do you really think that I should join the UPCI? Yeah. Or should I look for another organization? Because I don't agree with this, and this. And I pointed out what it was.
Yeah.
And, I come to the point where I realize a few things. Sometimes you do things out of respect, and there are things I do out of respect for Pastor Airwood. There's things I do out of respect for the people in the district, or whatever, and that I don't necessarily 100% agree with, and that's fine. I think that's good. And then there's some things that once I examined them further, I agreed with more.
Right.
Then I was young still. I was still young. And, you're developing your opinions on things as you go. And hopefully what you know when you're 25 is not what you know when you're 35, because, hopefully you've grown, right?
Evolved.
And I have. And I think that one of those things is this nonviolence, which in the UPCI manual, that's one of the things I had an issue with, is like, I can't take up arms for my country. I'm like, right. I'm thinking, like after 9/11, I was ready to join the Marines.
Probably most
red-blooded Americans were, yeah. I just had I struggled with that. I had trouble understanding that. But I finally now have realized where that comes from. And I've come to terms with it. And I feel pretty strongly about, if I ever got drafted, or I think I'm probably too old. I don't know how it works, but if that ever happened, I would have to be a conscientious objector because of the way I feel about it now. The way I felt about it at 25 or 26 was completely different.
Right.
But I've grown. So I think it was the best fit. It wasn't. I don't think anyone can ever agree 110% with everything that an organization says or that another person says. But I think it was close enough that it was the best fit for me.
Who has influenced you the most, really, in your walk with God?
I think. Okay, there's a couple of answers to this question. First of all, Pastor Airwood, Larry Airwood, has had a big influence on me. Not just I came into the church here in Seymour at a time in my life around 17. Probably I started coming here at a time when it was very volatile. At home, like I said, I wasn't really getting along with my dad, and like I said, a lot of that's my fault. But it was just a bad time for me in a lot of ways, and he was just different in the way he handled things, the way he handled himself, than other pastors that I had known throughout my life. Not to say anything bad about them, but it was just different, and it was a better fit for me, for one thing.
Yeah.
It was what I needed at the time, and I was able to grow there, and it took time, and he was patient with me. There were a lot of things that probably drove him crazy, and eventually I came around, and I think he saw that in me, that something was going to happen, that
right.
If I stuck with it, if he was patient with me, eventually I'd get there. But then working with him on a one-on-one basis a lot, or close proximity at the church, seeing what it's like to do ministry day by day, every day of the week. Right. And then the other one, it would be Todd Smith, pastor in Greensburg, Indiana. And he was our assistant pastor at the time when I worked at the church. And he had a big influence on my life. He's just one of those people that was a great example, really. Like how he lived, how he worked, how he was devoted. It's just everything about what he did on a day-to-day basis was, and I saw it there again because he was working at the church in ministry full time.
Yeah.
And I saw how he interacted with people, with tragedies in their lives, and people with crisis, crisis of faith, or something going on in their family life, or somebody with foot fungus that needed prayer. I mean, I'm not exaggerating.
Wow.
All this stuff. And he would pull me out of the office a lot of times. I think Brother Smith did this more probably than Brother Airwood, but Brother Smith would pull me out of the office if I was sitting at my desk working in my comfort zone, and have me help him pray with somebody. And that helped break me out of my shell a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm glad for that.
Right.
And there's other guys at our church that have also influenced, obviously, definitely, Aaron Airwood and Jeremy Smith, and they've had influences on me. Kenny Noble is a guy who was a Sunday school teacher of mine when I was younger, in a different church, but he goes to our church now, and he is one of those guys who influenced me just in that he always wanted to, be the best he could be. He's a very talented, multi-talented person. He does a lot of different things. I think we're going to have him on the podcast here in the near future. So he's an author. He was just an inspiring person to me. And I could go on, but the two major influences in my life, I feel like, are Pastor Airwood and Brother Todd Smith.
Okay.
And something I didn't mention when I talked about my fall from grace, and this kind of happened during the time from when I came to Seymour at 17 and when I finally got my act together. And this was created some major problems. I was in a band.
Yeah.
And you were in a band.
Yeah.
For a long time.
Yep.
And our band went through some interesting times, and we never really got it together as far as doing shows and keeping a solid lineup, and we fell apart. It finally imploded. But
that's funny. It's not to.
No, go ahead.
I'm just going to interject here real fast, but before we even met formally, I actually seen your band perform.
Really? I'm sure I saw yours perform too, because we hung out at the coffee house.
Right.
And there were several bands. I can't remember now which ones, but I'm sure yours is one of them.
I remember you guys playing. I think you were a 3-piece.
Probably a 3-piece at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at that time we might have been terrible. I don't know.
Right. I don't remember the music that you played. I remember your band.
Okay,
But,
so
yeah.
So we were, like, as far as I knew, we were the only group of Pentecostal kids with distorted guitars, and there was a drummer, bass player, distorted guitar.
No keyboard.
No keyboard.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know, it's sacrilege, isn't it?
Yeah.
So no keyboard, distorted guitars, and even at that point, actually that might have been a little early. I don't know. We went through this phase where I wrote some songs that had screaming parts, and that really would have shocked some youth group kids. But we were definitely a rock band.
Yeah.
I mean, we wrote things from a Christian perspective, but we were a rock band. I mean, I don't think any of our songs were about, they weren't worship songs, definitely. I don't even know if they reference God, but they were definitely from a Christian perspective.
Sure.
So...
On the inside, all the things you said were lies, and you left me all alone again. For years and years I've tried this pain I can no longer hide, and I'm all alone again. Sun has
anyway, so there was this conflict in the band. Like, some people wanted us to be more pop oriented. Some of the members wanted us to be, more of a Jesus band, like an altar call band. We play youth groups and we have an altar call and we preach during the set. And I just wanted to make music at the time. I just wanted to, let's be Christians in a band and just make music and see what happens.
Right.
So we went through a total of, I counted the other day, I think 14 members total. I was the only one that was there the whole time, and just never had a lineup where everybody was on the same page.
Yeah.
So, eventually we went through some, and I won't go into details on this stuff, and I'm definitely not going to say any names, but a lot of these members, people who are listening who might think the guys who were in our band, hopefully it's not somebody that you actually know. There were a lot of guys in and out of this band, but we went through things like, during the same time, I actually had a couple of guitars stolen by a band member. We had one band member who just disappeared, and literally didn't see for years. And there were all these rumors around town that he was dealing drugs, and he didn't pay his distributor, and they were trying to kill him. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's possible, very possible.
Wow.
We had somebody in the band who was actually there again, disappeared, and I didn't see him for a while, and I found out finally through his family what was happening with him, and he went to rehab in another state for heroin, I think it was. I didn't even know he was doing this. Like, I was freaking out at one point because one of the guys in the band smoked, and he was kind of a replacement that was probably ill-advised because he was also, I think, the one that stole my guitar. But I was worried about that, and I was like, don't do that. Don't do that when we're playing a show. Wait till you get home or something.
Right.
And come to find out, they were doing drugs. I had no idea this was going on.
Wow.
But we had all sorts of issues all across the spectrum. Stylistic differences, obviously drugs bringing a lot of problems. And I didn't know about those problems until they were hiding it, obviously, because I was really concerned. I wasn't that concerned at that point in my life about how I was actually living, but I was pretty concerned about how people thought I was living. Yeah. So the image was important, sad to say. But
so there was no one in church that you could just grab a member?
The problem was, all the people in the church. It was hard to find a guitar player back then, actually, in the church, because everybody played the keyboards or the drums. And you can only have so many drummers. One really was good for me, but
have a 2-drummer band.
Yeah, I didn't know what else to do. It's like, I guess we could just have more drummers because everybody plays the drums.
Yeah.
But we ended up struggling with that. And the guys in the church, if you would find a guy in the church, then they didn't want to play rock and roll. They wanted to play Southern gospel or something. Uh-huh. And we struggled with that with a couple of guys who were in church. And then actually one of the guys that we got who was in church and actually played an instrument at his church is one of the guys who ended up in rehab. So wow. It's like, it's all this stuff. And then eventually one of the guys, his brother was murdered. And that was somebody I had gotten pretty close to in the band. And I didn't know his brother, but when this happened, it was just completely wrecked, I think, his state of mind. And obviously probably would, I guess. And then not too long before that, we were renting a rehearsal space from a guy, and I showed up for band practice and nobody else showed up. So I took a nap on the couch. We had in his garage, we had a couch. I took a nap on the couch and left because I gave up on them after waiting an hour and a half. I got a call, or I think I got a call. I don't think I went back. I got a call later on from our guitarist saying that the guy who we rented this rehearsal space off of had killed himself. Jeez. In our rehearsal space. He hung himself. It was literally the couch I was sleeping on. He climbed up on the couch and the speakers next to it and hung himself from the rafters.
It's terrible.
Right in the middle of all of our equipment, and it was. I mean, maybe that should be the last thing on my mind at the time, but it was shocking. I didn't know what to think. I was like, it was a crime scene. You know, I couldn't get in to get my guitar. I mean, it was just, but I did barely knew the guy, but I did enough that it affected me. And the guitarist actually, at the time, it was the guy who found him, was good friends with him. And that really, you know, hit him hard.
Sure.
It was finally just too much. You know, nobody saw eye to eye. We didn't have the same values. Or when we get a great lineup together, they didn't want to play the same music. You know, it was like these guys are amazing musicians. They're on the same track as me pretty much, but they want to play Southern gospel. I don't want to play Southern gospel.
No.
Or any kind of gospel, really. I was wanting to play rock and roll.
Right.
But the guys who want to play rock and roll want to do drugs. And
unfortunately.
Right. And I just found myself in the middle, and it was like I just couldn't catch a break. And I finally just gave up and moved on.
That's funny. I had the opposite effect in my band. My band had the same thing we just couldn't work anything out, but it wasn't because they were doing drugs or anything. It's because one of them was becoming a doctor and the other was a professional salesman and was focused on he was a traveling salesman. He was focused on a job all the time. We could never get together to do anything.
That's a whole nother set of problems.
Yeah.
No, we didn't have any doctors come out of our band. But
yeah. Our keyboard player and guitar player became a doctor. Like priorities.
Right, I know. Come on, what about the music?
Yeah.
More
important.
Our guys weren't all bad. Let me say that. There's a couple of guys in the band that I grew up with, and they were in the early lineup of the band, and they were great guys. And whatever difference is, a lot of stress that goes along with the band. You know, that just came in between us a little bit, and then later on, a couple other guys who were in the band were great guys, and it was just we kind of got together and played a couple of things just to do it. We weren't really serious about making it a career at that point or anything like that. So, but it just became too much.
Yeah.
And it was really distracting me, and it was honestly leading me down a path that I think if we had any success, if we had the success we were looking for, then it would have been the end of my marriage. Probably it would have been the end of my walk with God. Probably because it is so easy when you're on. When you're playing music all the time, when you're even just playing small shows like we were, there's a lot of distractions. You know, I mean, there's so girls, there's drugs, and this is stuff that's just around. You know, so for me, I'm at this point in my life, I'm comfortable saying I'm glad it didn't happen, but at the time it was a huge letdown. I mean, I had spent thousands of dollars on we went and recorded an EP with 3 songs. And we spent a lot of money to get CDs made. And I had boxes and boxes and boxes of CDs. And we ended up selling a few hundred, I think. And then I mailed like 100 to record labels. And then we ended up, I think I used half of the ones I had left for used CDs I buy with a cracked case. I go open up one of mine and switch the cases out. It was like, so it was a bummer.
Yeah.
But in the end, I think it was right. I think it was a good thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, it led to fulfilling your calling.
Right.
And so, had you pursued music...
I don't think I would have...
Yeah.
I don't know what would have happened. Maybe it would have turned out okay, but I really... knowing the direction things were going and the mess that was going on there, I don't see it having gone well.
Just on the subject of music here, and you're a blogger as I actually really enjoy your blog. I think I've kind of worked myself into like kind of a niche where you're like everywhere with it. I
kind of do. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. But one of the things that you did talk about was recently, and unfortunately, the events that happened with a few of the musicians that you've talked about. It's sad, but you mentioned that they heavily influenced your life, and I'm referring to Chester Bennington from Linkin Park. And you wrote a really good blog post on this recently. Just how much has music in general just kind of really influenced who you are?
It's had a pretty dramatic influence on my life, I have to say. I grew up listening to music with my grandma, actually, originally probably on on vinyl. She had like an old console record player, and she
Yeah.
loved old country artists like Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings.
The good stuff.
The good stuff, yeah. So I got broken right, I guess,
Yeah.
stylistically. So Willie Nelson was one of those guys who I just listened to a lot of his music as a kid with her. And then I realized as I got older and started writing songs, just how incredible he was as a songwriter. So that was one of my early influences. But I think when I started to branch out in my early teen years and listen to more music, I joined one of those like Columbia Music Club and just ordered all kinds of things. Like basically I just started ordering everything that I hadn't listened to before. And I started listening to a wide variety of music. And I wanted to figure out what I liked. You know, I didn't know. I knew what my grandparents liked. I knew what my parents liked. And that's what I had listened to so far. But what did I really like?
Right.
And then in my teenage years, of course, then starting to write songs and being in a band, it kind of became central in my life. And it was probably too much at one point. Mm-hmm. And it really affected me positively and negatively. But there was a point in time, and I talked about this in another blog post, actually. I talk about POD, Christian guys in a band, not what you might consider a Christian band.
Right.
But a lot of their lyrics and things are about, are, religious or they're spiritual in some way.
Yeah.
And I think they actually might be Catholic. I'm not sure 100% on that. But there is this, I don't know why, but I just felt really connected with their music. And early on, I gravitated toward them specifically, but toward that kind of style, it was kind of there was a lot of hip hop elements in it. Maybe not that as much, but definitely the hard rock side of things.
Yeah.
And I listened to a lot of, hard rock, a lot of heavy metal, a lot of stuff that's far outside the wheelhouse of most people who grew up in the church. But some of my favorite bands at one point in time were, and I still listen to some of them now, were Haste the Day, which is a pretty heavy band.
Yeah.
Demon Hunter, Living Sacrifice. I listened to a lot of this stuff. POD in particular, and maybe to a lesser degree, Linkin Park.
Okay.
Who you talked about Chester Bennington earlier. Unfortunately, Chester Bennington committed suicide. Mm-hmm. And as well as right before that, Chris Cornell from Soundgarden and Audio Slave, and had a huge solo career as well. He also committed suicide. We see this, throughout history of music. A lot of musicians struggle with those kind of demons, and some of them lose the battle. But I would say specifically with POD and Linkin Park, they had a big impact on me in a certain time in my life when what I needed was something positive. I went through depression. I was very depressed at one point, and I just felt like I was stuck. Life was never going to get any better. I just couldn't see a way out. I was, at one point I don't know that I was really suicidal, but but it crossed my mind. I was to the point where I really feel like it was do or die.
Wow.
And for me, music is what spoke to me and allowed me to be able to deal with some of my issues, specifically POD and Linkin Park. Because if you're familiar with Linkin Park's early stuff, it was a lot of angst there, but also a lot of positivity.
Yeah.
So they had this rule where they didn't use any curse words in their songs. They broke that later on, but on Hybrid Theory, their first mainstream album at least, they didn't use any curse words. Their music to me was like this great combination of hope and angst, which I think that was honest to me. It was more honest than what I was used to hearing in Christian music, for example.
Christian music tends to be pretty cookie cutter
Yeah, there's a
know.
formula.
Yeah.
And you don't stray from the formula because, everything's supposed to be perfect and you're supposed to just sing about Jesus and and happiness and joy.
But the truth is, we're not always happy. We're not always joyful.
Right.
And how do we deal with these issues? It's not always so cut and dry as Christian music portrays it to be sometimes.
Right. And I wasn't finding that honesty in a lot of Christian music. And
that's not every Christian band and artist.
No, it's not.
It's just a certain group,
And that's before I really got into the deeper dive into Christian music and all the things that entails. But
Right.
I was more familiar with like Christian radio stuff, and that's what kind of turned me off to it. And I was listening to POD, a lot of Christian themes in their songs, but a song like "Set Your Eyes to Zion," it's very obvious.
Yes.
What this is about, and they're Christian guys, but. Some of their songs are also dealing with things like school shootings, like Youth of the Nation. So I could relate to it, I guess. And and with Linkin Park, same thing. The angst, but with the hope as well, was like it made me feel like it's okay to feel the way I do. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So it really did. Yeah. I mean, I went to the point. I went so far in my blog as to say that it saved my life, and I really do think that. Probably, especially POD and Linkin Park, that music at that point in my life was what I needed, and it did. It saved me from myself. It didn't save my soul, but it saved my life.
Yeah, that's powerful. Music is a very powerful thing, and I will always be an advocate of allowing music to be a part of our lives and ingrained in everything I do. Almost 90% of everything I do is music related at some form or another, whether listening to it or playing it or, writing it.
And it's cathartic. I mean, listening to the right music for whatever headspace you're in, I guess is important. Yeah. And also creating it is cathartic. So
I have a similar story, and maybe we'll get into it in the next episode, but where music saved my life in a sense.
Awesome.
Not necessarily a particular band, but music in general. So. What is the most influential book that has helped you in your walk with God, in your ministry, in your life?
That's a tricky one. I try to read quite a bit, and of course you could say the Bible. That I could give that answer.
I guess
and the Bible is important, right? I mean, very important. But and every time, every time you read it, I mean, you get more insight. You can't overstate how important it is. But honestly, I've read a lot of books, and I read a lot of books on leadership and business and things like that too. But this is gonna maybe sound kind of weird and out of left field, but one of the things, and I could give you a list of books I'd recommend anybody read, and maybe we'll do that at some point on one of our blogs or on the website.
A top 10.
Yeah, top 10 books. Yeah. And it's hard because there's so many categories. I read a lot of different things. I have a couple books that are totally left field. One on, ancient hunting techniques. And it's like, I don't know why. I saw it in Goodwill and I picked it up and thought, that looks really interesting.
Yeah.
And I get all these random books that I read, and I think I don't know, I'm just have ADD or something, but specifically with ministry, there are some great ministry books that I've read, or, Christian books that I've read that have influenced me. Like, one is Craig Groeschel has had a couple books that have influenced me quite a bit. There's the one I'm trying to think of I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's Confessions of a Pastor or something to that effect. Okay. Kyle Idleman, some of his stuff. God's at War. I really like that book. Not a fan. I'd also recommend that. Actually,
that's the title of the book, by the way.
Yeah, not a fan is a title of one of his books. Yeah. No, I am a fan of Kyle Idleman's though.
Yeah.
And just across the spectrum, there's so much good stuff out there. Some of the books that I read actually to get my license were great with practical insights into ministry and things like that. One of actually, and I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but there was a really great book before he stepped over the line. There was a really great book by Rob Bell called Velvet Elvis. It's kind of eye-opening book.
Right.
Paradigm shifting, you might say. Now, some people say it's paradigm shifted a little too much at some point, but that's neither here nor there. But that book I would recommend. But my biggest influence, Night by Elie Wiesel.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, because of the insights into human nature, the empathy, I guess, that you can get from reading and really understanding an issue like that, that you can't get anywhere else. A book I'm reading right now is Hiroshima.
Right.
And it's shaping up to be the same way. I've not finished it yet, but it's a very slow read for me because it's so heavy.
It is heavy. And what's interesting about that, I read that book, I think I was in middle school. I read that book. And it's just something that was on our library, or in our library, and I just picked it up and read it. And it's impacted my life, probably, at such a young age, but it's stuck with me all these years.
Right.
That's a very powerful story.
Yeah, those kinds of books tend to affect me. I guess I like to think about things. I'm very analytical about certain things. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I'm also a very emotional person. I'm not I don't get over emotional. It's like I can't control my emotions, I guess. But I am emotional. I feel things,
Yeah.
So those kind of books definitely impact me. Night, Hiroshima, those types of things that really look at human nature and look at human suffering. I think it's just, if you can understand that, if you understand the depths that humans will go to hurt each other, or develop this empathy for people that's not really natural.
Right.
Another one is Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass.
Yep.
I'm still going to say probably Night is number one on that list, but those types of books have influenced me more than anything else as a person and in ministry, because I feel like the thing I've developed that has helped me the most in ministry is empathy. Mm-hmm. And it's something that maybe needs more focus in ministry, is in preparation for ministry, but empathy is absolutely essential. And I think I've developed that partially due to this kind of reading.
Is there something in ministry that you wish that you could be doing more of, or you personally in your...
Yeah, there is. So I know it's a hard thing, because I think you go through seasons in your ministry, in life in general, but in your ministry too. And there have been times when I felt like overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed by what I was doing, or just life in general. Right now, I feel like I'm doing a lot of things almost mechanically. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm going to be transparent here. But some things I'm just doing mechanically because I'm supposed to do them, and I'm still doing them.
Right.
I feel like there's definitely a change coming for me. I don't yet know what it is, but I'm trying to seek God's will in that. And I know that if I'm seeking God's will, then eventually the right door's going to open, and I'm going to know I'll be able to step through it. But earlier on, before going for my license, we were doing a lot of home Bible studies, and that was a big part of my ministry. Actually, Todd Smith, on a Wednesday night, taught a home Bible study on the platform at our church, basically, just to show how easy it was.
Right.
And it impacted me, and I said, I think he actually asked, anybody have any questions? Or I was like, and my response was something like, why am I not doing it? Right. I don't remember exactly, but that was my thought. Definitely was, it's so simple. Exactly. Why am I not doing it? And then we started doing it, and we did several of them, which is actually how you and I met.
Yeah.
John and Aaron Pace, and my wife and myself, we did all these Bible studies. I think we probably did Bible studies with maybe 15 or 16 different people before I went to get my minister's license. And, I actually think all of them got baptized, and all but one got the Holy Ghost. And it was not that we did anything extraordinary, except that we just did it.
Right.
I guess we're obedient. You know, that's one of those things I feel like everybody can do at some level. And we were really committed to it for a while. And along with John and Aaron Pace, we were doing Bible studies together. We were doing home friendship groups together. We were constantly involved. And then we started doing a men's Bible study and all this different stuff. And it honestly got to the point where we were just overwhelmed. We were doing so much. It was like every night of the week we were going to prayer, midweek prayer services. We were doing, Wednesday night church, Sunday church. It was just every day or night of the week was something. And it was like a lot of times I was teaching on Sundays, sometimes twice on a Sunday. And it was to the point where I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed. I was burnout. It was burnout.
Right.
And I had to reevaluate where we were, and we had to refocus for a while, and we changed some things. And now our workload isn't as heavy, and it may get a little heavier here in the future because I feel this change coming on, and I don't know what it is. But whatever it is, I'm ready for it, I feel like. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to be careful in ministry not to let yourself just always work and never really accomplish anything, because it's easy to do that.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we get in that place where we feel like we're obligated, but we're not really feeling it anymore. It's too much pressure. We don't have the time to really do anything well. And then we end up just flailing and doing things, and nothing really ever happens. I don't think God wants that. I think He wants us to be really focused on what we're doing.
Right. I think that brings up another point, too. It's unfortunate that this is a trend in most churches, but it's like you talk about putting too much on your plate, doing, too many irons in the fire, if you will. Unfortunate, it seems like, what is it, the 80-20 rule?
The 80-20 principle, yeah, exactly.
Where, only 20% of the members of the church are doing.
And I would say it's more like, a lot of times, honestly, more like 5% doing 95% of the work.
Right.
But yeah, that's true.
And, it's unfortunate that it has to be that way. But, I guess, I don't even know if it has to be that way. It's just,
I don't think it has to, but it is that way.
Yeah. And so I feel for you, because I put too much on my plate as well.
Yeah.
But and I want to do more, but obviously there's constraints and I can't do it. But
time, space, and time, those kind of things. Yeah, those are constraints.
I'm going to kind of wrap this up a little bit, but I wanted to do a kind of a lighthearted question for you.
Okay.
This was actually a question that I was asked in marriage counseling when I first, my wife and I were getting married. We had premarital counseling, and this was a question, and I always found it interesting. But if you could and I'm hypothetically speaking, change your life with, trade your life with someone else. Could be someone famous, could, someone not so famous, it could be anyone. Who would that be and why?
Wow. I wasn't really prepared for this one. There's a lot of different ways to answer that question, I guess. It depends on what you're thinking about in the moment. I think, all things considered, all aspects of my life, I wouldn't trade it with anybody.
Yeah.
Because, I wouldn't trade my wife and son for, anything, all that stuff. My ministry, I feel like I'm in a pretty good place right now, and I'm on the right track, at least for what God wants for me. My career is, I think on a good track. All around, I feel pretty good. The podcast is awesome.
Yeah.
I do wish I had more time. There again, that's always the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be more efficient. I just finished, I don't think I ever finished it the first time I read it, but I just went all the way through the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss, and I am trying to apply some of those principles to my life to get more bang for your buck as far as time goes. But to say, let me do this. Can I modify your question a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. What if I can trade space or trade places for a day?
Okay.
And then trade back. Okay. If I can trade places for a day, there are a few really interesting people that I would consider trading places with for a day. One of those would be Tim Ferriss. He is a really interesting guy. I think it would be kind of cool just to do his job, just interview interesting, influential people.
Right.
And he's just an interesting guy. He's always doing these experiments to try to see how efficient he can be with his time, how healthy he can be. And I think in the process, he's done some pretty unhealthy things to try to experiments, but he's always trying to be better, learning languages, learning martial arts, all these different things. He's just an incredible guy. And I would recommend his books, The 4-Hour Workweek, The 4-Hour Chef, and I've not read The 4-Hour Body. I probably should read that. I probably use some of those tips, but maybe I should start just doing some sit-ups or something. But yeah, he'd be one of those guys I find really interesting. I don't know. I just don't really. There's not that much about my life that I don't like. I do love songwriting, and there's maybe some songwriters that I might consider, trading places with for a day just to see what it's like to be a pro, you know. And that's something that's interesting to me. I like writing. Actually, it's one of those problems that a lot of people have. I think I don't like writing as much as I like having written. So
you like the notion adding writer to your tagline.
Yes, I like when it says writer behind my name, or author, or best-selling author would be better.
New York Times bestseller.
New York Times best-selling author. Yeah, because everybody's a bestseller now. They just give away their book for free on Amazon, and it becomes a bestseller.
Right.
Yeah, so New York Times bestseller, that'd be great. Or hit songwriter. The problem is, I have these bursts of inspiration, and then I start on something, and then the hard work part comes in, and I don't finish it. And I have pages and pages and pages, notebooks, stacks of notebooks full of stuff. I have notes and notes and hundreds of notes on my phone of ideas that I've started and never finished, songs, books, whatever. And that's one of the reasons why I picked Tim Ferriss, is because in a day I would probably get more done if I was him than I do in a month. So that's one of the things.
All right.
Other than that, I don't really know. I mean, I don't know.
It was just some lighthearted. It was a question that it wasn't like necessarily you wish you could be someone else, but it was just,
I mean, I don't know. I guess it would be fun to do some things like, drive a race car, or, I don't know, be a rock star for a day. That would always be cool. But yeah, for a day, I'd trade it with almost anybody. I think it would be interesting. Yeah. There's some other guy. There's a guy, and I can't think of the guy's name. One guy I've watched online a little bit is Benny Lewis. But there's a few guys who are kind of doing the same thing. They're polyglots. They can speak a bunch of languages. I mean, some are hyper polyglots. There's one kid, and I can't remember his name. He speaks like 20 languages fluently. And I wish I could do that. But there again, when it comes to the daily practice, which is what's going to get me there at some point, it's just so hard to do. But I'm using Duolingo, so even without trading lives, someday I'll be able to really speak Spanish and Russian and Japanese, and it won't be just a distraction. I'll actually be able to communicate with people.
Right.
So, but it's time.
Jared and I once again want to thank you so much for all your support. Thank you for listening and subscribing to our podcast. I hope you've enjoyed getting to know Jared a little better. I know I did. And I hope you'll listen to next week's episode where Jared will interview me. I share my testimony and my conversion experience from a hardline Baptist to a Holy Ghost-filled, tongue-talking apostolic. Shouldn't disappoint. Just a couple quick things before we sign off here. Be sure to head over to our Facebook and Twitter pages at 2 Pentecostals. Please like and share those pages. Leave some comments. Let us know how you really feel. We do really appreciate all the feedback you give us. Don't forget to leave a review and comment on iTunes as well. You know, Jared and I have this pipe dream, and it would be really awesome if we made the top 10 in our category. But the only way for that to happen is if you rate and review. Also, for those who are unaware, we do have a website, twopentecostals.com, which has a link for every platform that our podcast is on. But more importantly, there are links to me and Jared's blog. We keep these updated fairly regularly, and we would love for you guys to check that out and hopefully subscribe to those as well. Thanks again for listening to Two Pentecostals and a Microphone.